listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
I wanna see the light.
My name is Jerry Mitchell. Sitting beside me, as usual, is Myra, who is frantically trying to figure out technology.
Hi, everyone.
In case you might not know this, it's summertime in the Northern Hemisphere, which means it's hot here, right?
It is hot.
And
Stifling.
So if you hear a little roar or a little something that you don't normally hear, that's either a fan or an air conditioner. They're also doing some construction nearby, so you might hear some rumbles of that as well. They've been out with their heavy equipment this morning doing all kinds of fun stuff. But it's always fun where we are, it seems. But anyway, excuse me. We are looking today at something interesting, and I'm going to be getting into some things that you may have never thought about, may have never considered about children. And I know that's a huge subject when you just leave it wide open like that. So we're probably going to break that down, and this might take a couple. I didn't really want to turn this into a series, but when I started putting the notes together, I realized that I can't say everything I need to say about this in just a half hour or 45 minutes. So this might take a little longer. Excuse me. When I was writing the books, Tradition of Truth and God's Universe, I didn't really touch on that subject a whole lot because I wanted people to this is going to sound funny. I wanted people to understand that there's a difference between what you've always been taught in church and what's really in the Bible. Sometimes those differences are very, very slight. Sometimes those differences are very, very wide. For instance, here we go. Even having children is viewed very differently around the world, right?
Right.
It's viewed very differently by different cultures, even within certain nations. It's viewed differently by religious groups in certain nations. In the United States, Christians look at having children differently. It's okay to have children if you're married, right? But it's not okay to have children if you're not married. But that's not what we read in the Bible. And as we start digging into this, what we're going to find is something amazing happens. And the success, the success of cultures around the world are measured today by many, many different standards. One way to measure the success of a nation or of a culture is by their military strength. Another way, it might be their economic impact that a nation has on the surrounding region they're in or in the world itself. Another way to look at it is how long a nation has maintained an important influence, whether it's economic or militarily. But there's a group of people out there that are a little different. This group of people is recognized for how importantly they treat their children. And their culture has been around a long, long time. Of course, we're talking about the Hebrew or Jewish cultures, and they have remained a people since Abraham, and that's about 38 or 3,900 years ago now. And while there are other nations as a whole have lasted longer, they've had a little bit of trouble. You know, Egypt was almost wiped out, right? Let's face it. Egypt, after the Exodus, was in dire straits. They had lost the majority of their army. They had lost their firstborn sons. They had lost their leader. They were in trouble, but they remained. Why is that? When we think about this, did you realize that practically every other pagan nation in the world has degraded the importance of children? Many early pagan cultures were quick to sacrifice children. You know, they just threw them in a volcano. They threw them in a fire. They did all kinds of things to sacrifice their children to their gods with a little g, but not the Hebrew culture. Many pagan cultures degraded their civilizations through sexual immorality, and that includes pedophilia. The Hebrew culture overall did not, and that doesn't mean that there were no pedophiles that came out of that culture, but it means that overall they did not allow it. In fact, it was punishable by death, and I believe it still is. Anyway, we're going to look at something else here. You realize that when God told Abraham that he would father many nations in Genesis 17, Abraham was like 99 years old. And the Almighty appeared to him and he said, look, if you will walk in front of me and be perfect. Now, perfect there actually means righteous, set apart, following the Almighty's instructions. Now the Almighty said, I'm going to make a covenant between you and me, and I will multiply you. Abraham's 99 years old, and he's going, wait a minute, I'm too old to have kids. But Abraham, he lays on his face, he gets out there, lays on his face, and God keeps saying, I'm going to make a covenant, and you're going to be the father of many nations. That's what it says, many nations, not just Israel, but many nations. Isn't that amazing? And by the way, Abram, I'm not going to call you Abram anymore. You're going to be called Abraham, because the father of many nations I have made you, just like it's already happened. Now, of course, Abraham at 99 years old, Sarah as old as she was, he was kind of like, okay, if you say so, maybe we can do this. I'm not exactly sure how. I don't really understand what's going on here, but if you say so, ever since that particular time, the Hebrew culture has placed extreme importance on its children. And what they have done through that is they have been able to maintain their society. I don't think I have to tell anybody that for a very long time, just a little over 2,000 years all put together, Israel didn't have a physical nation to call its own. It didn't have physical borders. But it remained, think about that, it remained its own ethnic group. Why is that? It's because of the way they were the importance that they placed on making sure that they raised their children properly. So properly and so important is it David writes in Psalm 127, and it's short, you can read the whole thing.
If the Lord doesn't build the house, the builders are not working for nothing. Sorry, the builders are working for nothing. If the Lord doesn't guard the city, the guards are watching for nothing. It is no use for you to get up early and stay up late working for a living. The Lord gives sleep to those he loves. Children are a gift from the Lord. Babies are a reward. Sons who are born to a young man are like arrows in the hand of a warrior. Happy is the man who has his bag full of arrows. He will not be defeated when they fight their enemies in court.
It took me a lot of self-control not to interrupt you when you said, the Lord gives sleep to those he loves. And then the next breath is, children are a gift.
And you're thinking about babies
And
keeping
I'm thinking
you up
about
all
babies
night.
keeping you up all night. Yep. But really, the Lord gives sleep to those he loves. And children are a gift. Don't forget this. Any parent knows that children will keep you up. And then during the day when you need to be up, they are going to sleep. Anyway, let's continue. Children are a reward. Babies are a reward. Nowhere are you actually going to read the words in the Bible that children are a blessing. However, the original verse 3 reads that children are I'm having a hard time talking today. I don't know why. It reads that children are our wages. Think about that. Our children are the way our Creator pays us. That's kind of that puts a little different look on your face, doesn't it? In other words, children are what we earn. Now, I know a lot of people talk about you can't earn your way into heaven, right?
Right.
Well, what did we do to earn our children? Have you ever thought about it that way? What did we do to earn our children? This is why they're considered a blessing, because it is something that the Almighty gives to us, or I shouldn't say it is. They are something that the Almighty gives to us because we have deserved it. You don't pay somebody who works for you to do nothing, right? And Scripture also says a workman's worth his wages. Well, think about that. If children are what we earn, and they in turn then, because they are a gift from the Almighty, become this blessing, when a person has many children, he's considered rich. David says they're like arrows in a quiver. And any archer an archer shoots a bow and arrow, right? Any archer will tell you that it takes practice if you're going to hit your target with those arrows. What target are you aiming for? To raise children to respect the Creator, it takes practice. And I wish I had known this 30-some years ago. Maybe ours would have turned out better. I don't know. They might have turned out worse. I'm not sure. So when I start stepping on people's toes here, don't think that I haven't beat myself up over this just a little bit too. But the information I have now is far greater and far different than what I had 30-some years ago. I didn't have the opportunity of knowledge that I have now, and hopefully there are some younger parents who are going to hear this who can learn from the mistakes of all the old folks out here. Solomon writes in Proverbs 22:6, if you train up a child in the way it should go, when he's old, he won't depart from it. And there's a lot of parents out there, just like us, who didn't know how to do it properly, right? I'll confess it. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no clue. Did not understand it. It just wasn't in one of those things that I had figured out how to do. By the time the grandchildren come along, we had it kind of almost figured out, sort of. Still working on it, but it's improving.
We have a lot to learn yet.
We have a lot to learn yet. Yeah, I am a work in progress. Just like many, many other parents out there who are believers. I was taught, if you drag a child to church, you drag a child to Sunday school, you drag them to their family gatherings, you drag them here, you drag them there, they should turn out okay. That's how we were taught. Well, what actually happens if you drag a child to all those places, but you neglect to teach them how to live the way they're designed to live? All you've done is to create a drug problem. Literally, in many senses. But if you drag them around, they get a drug problem because they're drug here, they're drug there, they're drug everywhere else. But if they don't have the foundation and they don't understand why they are there, that is just one of the things you're going to wind up with. You're going to wind up with the children who are looking for answers somewhere other than where they should be looking for them. Maybe it's just a possibility, but the Bible has an answer for this. And in Deuteronomy 6:4, we hear a very, very, very familiar passage.
Listen, people of Israel, the Lord is your God. He is the only Lord. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Always remember these commands I give you today. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and walk along the road. Talk about them when you lie down and when you get up. Write them down. Tie them to your hands as a sign. Tie them to your forehead to remind you. Write them on your doors and gates.
Now that should be, for most people, a very familiar verse, often referred to as the Shema, not the Shema, okay? It's Hebrew, folks. Pronounce it like Hebrew. This is one of the very first verses that Hebrew children are taught. Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Hear, O Israel, for all of the King James folks. The Lord your God, the Lord is one. You're going to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Does that sound familiar? Now, when somebody asks Yeshua, when somebody asks Jesus what the two greatest commandments are, the first thing he comes up with is what he learned as a child, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and in Hebrew it's all your all your everything that you have. And that's where that comes from. He's actually quoting Moses. If you teach your children to teach their children to teach their children to teach their children, that's also reiterated a little earlier in chapter 4. If you follow the instructions, if you teach your children to teach their children to teach their children, it's going to perpetuate not a culture of degrading your children, but a culture that builds them up, a culture that does things not for them, not enabling them to always be children, but a culture that teaches children to be the best people they can be, to be successful, to give them the information, to give them the tools they need to be successful, to be productive, to be joyful, to be happy, to be all of those things that the Almighty wants them to be, for them to be able to be the example for the next generations. Now, here's where I'm going to get in trouble. And that's okay. I live there. I know a lot of people, when they see parents having trouble with young children especially, and even in their older teenage years. Now, when I say young children, I mean not just babies, okay? I'm talking all the way up through puberty, okay? And These parents look out there, especially these good Christian parents who say, "Oh, that baby Jesus, they just need Jesus. They just need to get them some Jesus." Have you ever heard that? Have you ever said that? What they're saying is they need to have Yeshua in their life, and that is partially true. But that's kind of like introducing them to someone, and they have no idea who it is. Because if all they're doing is learning to trust somebody else, you're transferring your authority, and you're saying, well, I can't be that example. And that's not what we read in the Bible at all. There's more to it. There's more to it than parents just needing to introduce them to a biblical persona, for lack of a better word. You know, there's a lot of Jewish children that knows exactly what the rabbis say. There's a lot of Christian children who knows exactly what the preachers say, but neither one actually knows their Creator. I know Christian children who can recite John 3:16 as well as a Jewish child can recite the Shema. The problem is they're not really being taught what those things mean at a young enough age. Sometimes it's because their parents don't know either. I didn't know it. I do now, but I didn't know it then. You know, when Moses wrote Deuteronomy, it was nearly 40 years after leading a rebellious people through the wilderness. He knew he wasn't going to be around forever. Right? He knew that in order to pass along the information, the parents needed to know the instructions, the commands that the Creator himself was teaching them. And they needed to do it diligently. Now, when we say diligently, I don't mean like you will conform to the commands. That's not what I mean at all. You know that diligently means that you do it consistently. It means that you do it through proper application, with proper instruction. Children should be able to trust their parents. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of that today. That's for the next time, as much as I want to. Because when I go places with this, you're going to be surprised what you learn, and you're going to understand why David wrote what he wrote. It's not that children just need Jesus. It's that children need parents who are capable of giving them that diligent, consistent, applicable example. Right? The nations around the world, even today, who degrade their children in any form, whether it is through child labor, and I'm not saying that children shouldn't work. You've got to teach, that's part of that diligent teaching is children need to learn how to work. But they also need to learn how to add and subtract and how to speak whatever language they are being trained in fluently. It's not just a one thing problem. It's widespread. The nations around the world that are failing the most right now are the ones who are degrading their children the most right now. Should I say that again? That the nations that are failing the fastest are the ones who are degrading their children the most? Look around the nations. How many times do you see child sex slaves being traded on the news? How many times do you see? Now, I know a lot of places don't get the opportunity to see this, and a lot of people don't want to see it because some of the news places don't want to cover it. But as you look around, think about that. As you look at the United States, we can really point to the United States right now, especially. When did the United States begin their descent? Now, some people are going to say, oh, it was, way back when. But it really wasn't, because as long as we actually were following the biblical instruction and teaching children to become responsible, honest, hardworking citizens, things were doing pretty good. Post-World War II, what happened? There was a huge movement who said, no, children need to be seen and not heard. Children need to be this and not that. Children need to be that and something else. Oh, by the way, unwanted children. That's a problem. And it is a huge problem, but not for the child. It's a huge problem for the nations that consider people unwanted, especially children. I know what I would have considered a long time ago to be good Christian people who would, degrade's not a strong enough word, women for becoming pregnant. Well, it takes two, right? You can't do it, well, you can now if you go the artificial insemination way. But 50, 60 years ago, you couldn't, it took two people to get pregnant. Right?
Right.
Today, you can go basically buy a baby, so to speak. But that's different. It still takes the egg, it still takes the sperm. You can't get around that. As far as I know, we have not advanced to the point where we can clone a human and have it actually mature and be
viable,
a real person. We've cloned sheep, fine. They don't have that breath of God that people were given in Genesis. Getting a little off track there, but you know where I'm going with this. We began to place less importance on children and more importance on self. We began to legalize abortion. We began to legalize child labor, and not in a good way. There's a very strong feeling in the United States for all the folks who are outside the United States. I'm going to say it this way. There's a lot of people in the United States who really do believe that when a government gets involved in something is when it becomes corrupt and perverted. When the government began to get involved in child labor laws, it corrupted them. It corrupted them to the point that it was ridiculous, right? If they'd have just said, children need to go to school, which they need education, great. But you know what? You can take a parent who runs a business and teach that child math and English in the United States, in the case of the United States, math and language and history through that business. And then for their formal education, they can go. But there's a lot of times where certain forms of government says, well, a child can't even interact with customers until they're a certain age. A child can't perform certain tasks until they're a certain age. They restrict what the family can do. That's not healthy. That's giving up your parental responsibilities there's got to be a stronger word than that. But it's giving up being a parent and turning it over to the government. That's not what we are about in the United States. We are only going, a lot of times people in the United States, they like to quote that 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name will repent and pray, I will heal their land. Well, one of the things that they really need to be doing is not just that, but they need to be working to stop the degradation of children, not just in the United States, but around the world. Children are a gift from the Almighty. And, it says, you just read it, right? Mm-hmm. So if they are a gift and they are what we earn, what are we going to do with that? If you think of them as wages, I know there's people out there who, they say, oh, we live paycheck to paycheck. That's kind of weird. Most people like to put money in the bank and watch it earn interest. How do you put a child in the bank and watch it earn interest? You teach them to follow the Creator's instructions. And the interest that you get back is a child who is not rebellious, a child who is happy and joyful, a child who feels loved and wanted, not one who is bounced around from place to place, not one who just looks sad. I get pictures from all over the world, and some of these pictures include children, and one of the folks who likes to send me pictures they're looking for donations, and that's fine. But they talk about hungry children and the looks on those children's faces. Even though their bellies might be hungry, the looks on those children's faces are they're happy because somebody is teaching them. Somebody that is caring for them. Somebody has a desire that they succeed. And I look at the faces on a lot of American children and I don't see it. Because they're being bounced around either from parent to parent, school to school. They're being pushed into things that they don't need to be pushed into. They don't know to trust, or they don't know who to trust, because parents don't know how to parent. So the next time on Thursday when we come back and meet again, we're going to look at parents and their responsibility, their role, and how they are to diligently teach their children, right? Lead by example. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Thanks for listening to us today, and love your babies.
Absolutely. Until Thursday, ladies and gentlemen, we're at 7 p.m. Eastern. Or, I'm sorry, 7 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. What time do we do that? 7:30. Where's my brain today? Anyway, until then, many, many blessings.